Hey everybody, Aaron Rift here from NoDQ.com to talk about the worst moments of the Ruthless Aggression era. This period is roughly between when the brand extension first started to when WWE announced that they were going PG in July 2008. I asked people on Facebook and Twitter for their input, got a lot of responses, and I've come up with a list here. Now I'm sure I'm missing some significant moments, so if you feel I should have included something on this list, leave a comment, youtube.com/NoDQCW. With that being said, let's get right down to this. First off, WWE's version of the NWO. WWE screwed up a lot of concepts from WCW, and they definitely did not handle well a lot of the talent that they brought from WCW. With the NWO, it had so much potential. I mean, there was a ton of buzz when Vince, I really liked that first segment they did with Vince. They had him, the whole feud with him and Ric Flair, and Ric Flair was getting the upper hand and the best of Vince. So Vince said that he was going to inject the WWF with a lethal dose of poison. And then he turns his chair and you have the NWO logo. This was a great way to introduce the NWO. I love this segment. But the first mistake was right when the NWO came in the first night. The NWO, they were known for being the invaders and the outsiders coming in and causing havoc. And, whenever the NWO was around, it was a chaotic situation. When the NWO came in, made their first appearance at No Way Out, it just felt like they were part of the roster. It felt way too scripted and way too forced and didn't feel like the old school NWO from the very first promo. So right off the bat, it wasn't off to a good start. And the fact is, fans didn't want to see the NWO Hulk Hogan. That was another issue. The fans wanted to see the red and yellow Hulk Hogan. So, that definitely hurt the NWO when Hogan turned face and went back to the classic WWF red and yellow colors. And they tried to make up for it. They brought X-Pac back as a member. They brought back Big Show. But there was just one issue after another. Scott Hall, his health was declining and he was having issues, so they had to release him, and that hurt it as well. And then the final death blow was the match on Raw, the big 10-man tag. Kevin Nash was out of action for a couple months with an injury, and he comes back, and in his first match, he literally just runs across the ring and tears his quad. And the next week, Vince McMahon announces the end of the NWO. So a very sad ending to one of the greatest factions of all time. Katie Vick. This is a notorious segment. Many would consider it to be among the worst moments ever in WWE, not just the Ruthless Aggression period, but of all time. A line that probably should not have been crossed, but WWE was still in a period where they were pushing the envelope, and I think most people would agree that they went too far here, doing a segment based off of necrophilia with Triple H in the coffin with Katie Vick, and obviously it wasn't a real corpse, but still, people just thought it was in extremely bad taste, and I don't think it was necessary. I mean, I personally wasn't offended by it, but it just didn't really serve any purpose. It didn't get people more interested in the feud with Triple H and Kane. All it did was piss people off. So, was not an effective storyline at all. And it's not good when you offend more of your audience than entertain them. And speaking of tasteless storylines, Al Wilson. You had this storyline with Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie, and Dawn Marie was having an affair with Tori's dad, Al Wilson, and right after they have sex, Al Wilson dies. And that right there, I mean, it's so ridiculous having somebody die in a storyline here like this. And then they had the funeral segment, and my God, that was one of the worst segments of all time. You had Al Wilson's corpse in a coffin, an open casket, and then you have Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie having a brawl right there in the in the room, and then they end up knocking over the casket. Wow, was this ever in bad taste? I mean, it was funny and all, but at least to me. But geez, what were they thinking with this one? What were those creative members smoking when they came up with this idea? I would like to know. WWE's handling of Goldberg. I mentioned this earlier. WWE had a tendency around this period to misuse the former WCW talent, and no exception with Goldberg. They could have done so much more with him. Fans wanted to see the old style Goldberg, the Goldberg that came out and just destroyed people and was an ass-kicking machine. But WWE had to try to mold Goldberg into the WWE Goldberg. And first thing they did, I remember they had a segment with Goldberg and Goldust, and Goldust put a wig on Goldberg's head. And, WWE is trying to make Goldberg, the sports entertainer and show that he has dimensions and he can do comedy or whatnot. But this was stupid. Nobody wanted to see Goldberg do something like this. If it was a WCW Goldberg, he would have just destroyed Goldust and beat the crap out of him. But no, he just wore the wig and was all happy about it or whatever, just went along with it. That hurt him. And then you had the Rock concert segment with Rock and Goldberg. And this really damaged Goldberg, in my opinion, because The Rock outsmarted him something like 3 times in one segment. The Rock runs away. Goldberg tries to chase him. And I remember Goldberg's car wouldn't start, and then he just ran out after The Rock. That was lame. And then Goldberg came out later, and The Rock beat the crap out of him. It just made Goldberg look like a fool. And, the Elimination Chamber... I remember that. I remember how the fans really wanted to see Goldberg win the title in that match, and it looked like WWE was going back to the old Goldberg because he came out and was just destroying one person after another, and then Triple H hits him with a sledgehammer, and that's the end of it. And the next month, Goldberg wins the title, but nobody really cared at that point. And speaking of Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar, WrestleMania 20. A lot of fans say this is the worst WrestleMania match of all time. Obviously, there's been worse matches, but in terms of a high-profile match that people were really looking forward to and they were let down by, I mean, it's definitely up there at the top of the most disappointing matches. And I thought it was an entertaining match. I liked the fact that the crowd crapped on it, and I was personally amused by it. But the fans wanted to see a match between these guys where they went all out and just had a great match, and it didn't happen. And the fans knew both guys were leaving, and both guys really didn't put the effort in because they weren't staying. So it was just a bad situation for them and a bad situation for the fans. Paul Bearer being put in cement. This was the Great American Bash 2004, and this was their way to write off the Paul Bearer character, but it was really dumb. Basically, he died, but they had to later say that he only suffered major internal injuries and he was still alive. I mean, the reasoning was just ridiculous. And Undertaker's the one that actually killed him. Undertaker pulled the lever to kill or seriously injure Paul Bearer. I mean, it was just really dumb. That's the only way I can put it. Vince McMahon's mocking of Jim Ross. Over the years, especially during this period, we saw a lot of segments where Vince tried to humiliate JR and make him look bad. And fans were really bothered by it because, most fans feel that JR is the greatest play-by-play announcer of all time, and why would Vince go out of his way to embarrass him on national television? There was one segment where Vince was a surgeon and he kept pulling objects out of JR's ass. And, I kind of found that segment to be funny. But I remember a lot of people were offended by it. And I just don't get why you would do segments like this. I mean, if it was leading to a storyline or you were actually going to build up to a match, then, I could understand doing a segment like this where you make fun of JR. But it wasn't leading to anything. It was just Vince bullying JR on national television. I mean, it was what it was. And, they've even done it in recent years, but we're talking about the Ruthless Aggression period here. They did a lot of segments where with JR and the coach and just segments to make JR look bad. But no matter what WWE did, the fans still wanted JR on the announce booth, and they still had respect for him. So nothing Vince McMahon did would change the minds of the fans. WWE exploiting Eddie Guerrero's death. This was definitely a very low thing for WWE to do. I didn't care for it at all. I mean, first of all, I didn't like what they did with Rey Mysterio, having him win the world title and having him win the Rumble, doing all this stuff just because Eddie died. I felt that was a bad move, and it devalued the title. And they never really wanted to push Rey Mysterio as a world champion, because once he won the title, they just had him losing every match as champion. So I mean, what was the point? It was just cheap, a cheap way to try to draw people to the product. Ray doing it as a tribute to Eddie or whatever. I mean, if he won one match, that's fine, but they had this going for months and months, and I didn't care for it at all. And then I think at one point, Randy Orton said that Eddie Guerrero was in hell, and it's just cheap heat. But yeah, a lot of fans were offended by this, and I just don't think it was smart business. And speaking of offending people, Vince McMahon versus God. There was this tag match for Backlash, Vince and Shane against Shawn Michaels, and Vince made Shawn Michaels' partner God. I wasn't offended by this at all, but a lot of people were, and it just didn't really serve any purpose. I think it was another line that you don't cross. I mean, there's just some things you don't want to do. You don't want to get into politics, and you don't want to get into religion, because everybody has different opinions about these topics, and to do something like this, you're risking alienating a lot of your audience. So it was a bad business idea, and I mean, I honestly thought it was mildly amusing. When they had the match and the spotlight was coming down. But I mean, when you order pay-per-view, you want to actually see some matches, and you don't want to see a goofy storyline. They could have done something like this on Raw, but whatever. We did get one classic moment at the end when JR said, "Oh, that's bullshit," when Spirit Squad interfered and cost Michaels the match. But besides that, I mean, that match was pretty bad. The Great Khali's main event push. This was quite brutal. The Great Khali was definitely an attraction, this freak of nature, but once they put him in the ring and had him in matches, he really couldn't do anything. He basically just stood there and chopped guys and didn't really do a whole lot. And we had to see a lot of matches with him, him versus Undertaker, him versus Batista. We had the infamous basketball promo with Batista and Great Khali. We had the Punjabi prison matches. So we got some lousy main event matches with Khali, and almost every time when he'd come out, the fans would chant, "You can't wrestle." And I think it was fine having him feud with the Undertaker, but putting the world title on him, I don't think that was necessary. ECW as the third brand. On paper, it sounded like a good idea if you were going to make it like the old ECW, but right from the beginning of when the brand started on Sci-Fi, it was clear that WWE wasn't going to make it like the old ECW, and it was going to be more like the third WWE show, and that's what it was. It was the C show. And it didn't work. I mean, it was a good idea to try to bring in some new talent and push them on the third show, but nobody really took ECW seriously at this point. And the December to Dismember pay-per-view was a complete disaster. And Bobby Lashley as ECW champion, I mean, nobody wanted to see that. And then it just eventually fizzled out, and that was the end of ECW. So it was definitely a failed experiment. And finally, the last moment I'm going to talk about here today is Hornswoggle revealed as Vince McMahon's son. There was so much hype for this segment. At first, Mr. Kennedy was going to be the person in that role as Vince's son, and he would get a huge push, but then he got suspended, and WWE had to change plans. They could have picked anybody. They could have had any guy on the roster be Vince's son and get that rub and get that push. But WWE decided to just go with Hornswoggle. And it was a huge letdown. Major letdown, I think. A lot of people were disappointed. And, it could have been so much more, but it was just one of the biggest letdowns of that period. All right, that'll do it for my thoughts on the worst moments of the Ruthless Aggression era. Let me know what you think. YouTube.com/NoDQCAW. And stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest in WWE and TNA. Thanks for watching.